Hi, I'm Drew Norton, the Everyday Sales Leader. Excited to have you on today's daily dose of sales inception. So, what I want to talk a little bit about today is the art of the question and how your questions are important in mastering your sales conversations. I really believe that your ability to ask powerful and effective questions really will translate to whether or not you're successful in sales. And you maybe have heard before that selling isn't telling. I think sometimes people think that having the gift of gab or being able to talk about things in an excited way is how you sell something. And my experience has been the better I've gotten at asking questions, the better I've gotten at helping people recognize things that maybe they didn't see prior or see before. And so there are different types of sales questions. And those different sales questions, the different questions in a sales process can prompt different thoughts, different emotions, different responses. And sometimes just phrasing a question a little bit different can make all the difference in the world. So I want to talk about a few different types of questions you should have and implement in your sales conversations. Some of those are what I like. I didn't come up with this, but no oriented questions. I love Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, and Jim Camp's book, Start with No. In Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, he talks about the power of asking questions that intentionally get people to say no versus yes. So talk a little bit about that. Sometimes I want to intentionally ask a yes or no question to really draw a line in the sand and get somebody to commit to one side or the other. Another question that's really important is open-ended questions. Am I giving people an opportunity to think through and talk through and discover some things by setting up my questions in the right way? And the last one I want to talk about is probing questions, or maybe we might even call them uncomfortable questions. Now, when I say uncomfortable question, I don't necessarily mean asking something to somebody that just is rude or not polite. And I really think the better you are, or the more willing you are to ask questions that get people to think about things they don't want to think about and they're maybe avoiding thinking about, can really create some powerful action or really help somebody move and decide at the end of the day. I think as salespeople, probably the most frustrating thing isn't to hear a no from somebody, it's to hear a maybe or to hear I want to think about it, right? So how do we get people off the fence? How do we get people to make decisions? And a lot of times the decisions they make come from good questions we ask early on in the sales process. Asking the question at the end of the sale, having an option closed, do you want to use a credit card or do you want to pay with an electronic check? That's not what closes somebody. That's not the question that makes somebody move forward. Now, it might help them make a simple decision, and there's often other questions asked earlier on that are going to impact and influence the way your prospect is thinking about something. So to dive into a couple of these, I love no-oriented questions. No allows people to feel safe. No allows people to feel like they are in control, right? So I did a lot of door-to-door sales as an example of that. I would often ask, a common question asked by door-to-door salesmen is, hey, are you the homeowner? You want to establish that you're talking to the right person. I noticed sometimes that when I'd ask that, most of the time people would tell me yes or no. I think sometimes people lied and said they didn't own the house. But I noticed that sometimes there was some resistance to answering that. Almost like they were in trouble, right? Like if you ever asked your children who did this, well, I didn't do it, not me. They're afraid of saying yes and what that might cause or what might happen, right? Or maybe you've had a salesman who's asked you questions where they're trying to get you to say yes on purpose, and you just feel like, I don't want to answer yes because I know they're going to use that yes against me, right? Right? So wouldn't it be important to you that you have a car that's safe for your family? Wouldn't it be important to you to have a car with good gas mileage, right? Now, not to say that there's not a time and place to use a question like that. And if you ask those questions early on in a sales conversation, people start digging their heels in and trying to stop. They don't want to say yes early. So I would love to ask, when I did door-to-door prospecting, I would ask people, hey, are you guys renting the house? Some interesting psychology there. One, it allowed them to tell me no early in the conversation. Two, people like to correct you. So I'd have people that would puff their chest out a little bit and, no, this is my house. Like, I'm the king of the castle here, right? Where if I ask that same person, are you the homeowner? It's like, well, what do you want? What's this about? Why are you asking, right? And people will get really defensive and afraid to ask that. So some easy ways to take a question and turn it into a no-oriented question. And I think no-oriented questions work the best early in sales conversations, just to give that person the feeling that they're in control. You know, would you be opposed? Would you be against? Or it might even be, would you be in support of something that's normally negatively viewed, right? You know, would you be in support of the recent law that was passed that did X, and maybe there's a real negative consequence there, right? So no-oriented questions are something I really love. Now, there is a place for yes and no questions. You know, there is a place for drawing a line in the sand and helping you see and also the customer discover if they're ready to move forward or not. You know, what might a question like that look like? What would be a good yes or no question? You know, are you okay with things staying where they're at right now in your business? No, I'm not. Or yeah, it is okay. And that might tell you, if someone tells you yes to that question, it's like, okay, they're not ready to move forward. This may not be a qualified prospect that I'm talking to, right? So there is a place for yes or no questions. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular part of our daily dose today. What I would like to spend a couple extra minutes though on is open-ended questions. So maybe I would ask a yes/no question of, hey, do you see how this could actually help you or benefit you? Follow it up with, what would that do for you? How could that help you? Who, what, when, where? All great questions. Why is dangerous? Chris Voss talks about that in his book as well. Why makes people get defensive. So you want to be calibrated in when you ask a question that begins with why. But, you know, what would having a tool or solution like this do for your business? How do you see that helping you? What do you think would happen if you guys didn't have to deal with this problem anymore that you've told me about today? Right? So I like open-ended questions, especially if we've prepped them before with some information. So you prep them with some information, you show them a feature or benefit, you ask them an open-ended question, and then you allow them to start making decisions themselves, or really, you allow them to start selling themselves. It's way more powerful when someone speaks words themselves out loud than if you tell them those same words as the salesperson. So if I can get somebody to say what it would do for them, you know, hey, actually, if I were to do this, we'd save some money every month, and that would allow me to pay for a trip to Disneyland with my kids this year. Like, that's way more powerful than anything you could draw out or point out for them. If they tell you, if they can start telling you the reasons why purchasing your product or working with you would benefit them, wow. Like, that, it opens up so much and makes it so much easier to sell them. And they'll get past a lot of their objections when they do that. I would love asking the question, well, what happens if you don't do this? And let them realize, hey, if I don't move forward, what are the consequences? And sometimes they discover there's some costs to not moving forward. And the last ones are just probing questions or uncomfortable questions. Am I willing to ask people questions that makes them uncomfortable with their present and current situation? You know, there's another book I love called Gap Selling that talks about the gap between somebody's present state and their future state. And if they don't see much of a gap and they think it's easy to get from where they are to where they want to go without you, there's no reason for them to buy. But if there's a huge gap between where they are right now and where they need to go, where they want to go, and there's no way to get there with what they're currently doing, that's where you have an amazing solution. And so, are we willing to ask some uncomfortable questions to people? When we recognize the pain that they're in, are we willing to dig into that a little bit more and ask them, hey, what happens if, for example, once again, what happens if you don't do this? You know, you just spent all this time telling me how your spouse has told you how important it is for you to get back in shape. Maybe you're a fitness coach, get back in shape and take priority of your life. Like, what's she going to think if you just keep delaying this, or if you never do anything about it? Right? What's the impact it's going to have on your kids if you don't have the energy when you get home from work at the end of the day to go out and play with them and create some memories if you're too tired and too exhausted because you're out of shape? Right? Or maybe it's, hey, what happens if you don't get enough leads? What's going to happen if you don't move forward with our lead services and you continue to only get a few leads a month? What's going to happen to your business? Right? And a lot of times people don't want to talk about those things. Maybe they've started to think about it and they bury their head in the sand. They don't want to have a conversation about it. And so your willingness to ask those uncomfortable, probing questions can really help people make decisions. And so it takes a mindset of a leader. It really takes a belief that, hey, I'm not afraid to ask a question that might make them not like me if it's going to serve them at the end of the day. I can be way more bold when I'm willing to ask questions that are in their best interest. And we can't assume that just because we're talking around a subject that they've thought through all of that. There is so much power in getting them to talk through something uncomfortable. And so, challenge I would give you is that look in your sales process for uncomfortable questions you can ask your prospect. And once again, we could go off on a tangent. I don't mean asking things that are rude or personal necessarily, or inappropriate. And if you're not willing to ask those type of questions that get them to dig into their pain a little bit, you're missing out on so much opportunity to help serve somebody. Thanks for tuning in today. Once again, I'm Drew Norton, the Everyday Sales Leader, and this is your daily dose of Sales Inception.